8 minutes past 6. As you'll have heard in Indira's news, search and rescue efforts continue in the Ukrainian city of Zaporizhzhia following a missile strike. The attacks come after Russian President Vladimir Putin said yesterday he's expecting the situation to stabilise in the claimed territory. It begs the question, though, how is this special military operation working out so far? To tell us more, we're pleased to welcome Otago University International Relations Professor Robert Patman back to breakfast. Professor Patman, we're always grateful for your time. Thank you for being with us this morning. Can we start with where things are at in terms of Putin? And this point in time, it must be quite humiliating for him. When you think about Ukrainians' forces reclaiming some of those areas that were annexed by Russia, just under a week ago now, this must be humiliating for Putin.
Yes, I think he's finding himself in a very difficult position. And in many respects, he knows that if the military situation in eastern Ukraine continues to deteriorate, and of course, since the beginning of September, the Ukrainians have made spectacular progress, particularly in the Kharkiv region, but more recently they're beginning to press also around Kherson. And a large number of Russian troops are trapped in Kherson. So with the current momentum, the Ukrainians are set to make further gains. And Mr. Putin's in this situation, as you're quite rightly saying, making declarations about annexing, but on the ground, the situation doesn't correspond to his rhetoric. And I think there are deep signs of unease within Moscow. Okay,
so given Ukraine's latest successful counteroffensive, given the exodus of people leaving Russia at the moment, given the protests in Russia, is Putin's power slowly slipping away?
It seems to. He's put a lot of faith in this partial mobilization, but he's done that because of the difficulties he's now facing, because he's lost a lot of troops. The Russian government has not been candid about the number of casualties, and probably close to 50,000 or more Russian troops have been killed since the so-called special military operation, we would call it an invasion, of Ukraine began in February. He has to replace those people and try to consolidate and fortify Russian positions in the territories he's annexed. But there's going to be a lag between the mobilization and those people getting in the field. And in the meantime, the Ukrainians are seeking to build on the momentum. They're just not allowing the Russians to regroup. What they're doing is seizing territory and then relentlessly pressing, which means the Russians are continually retreating at the moment. And that's very unsettling, and morale is very low within Russian ranks. So he needs really to consolidate quickly. If he doesn't, he could lose power and perhaps his life, because the stakes are very high. This is the worst crisis in Mr. Putin's 22 years in power, either as president or as prime minister of Russia.
Professor Patman, we've spoken to a number of commentators throughout this entire, let's call it invasion, as you rightly say. And most of them have talked about a long, drawn-out war. Putin, though, has underestimated Ukraine's fight and their belief. Is there now a belief that Russian troops could be forced out of Ukraine in the coming weeks, maybe even perhaps at the end of this year?
Yes, I would say closer to the end of the year, but I do not rule out that possibility, Jenny May. I think many people have looked at the disproportion in power between Russia and Ukraine and the size of the two countries and drawn the conclusion that Russia can't be beaten. But I think the experience of great powers getting beaten by lesser powers, the Americans in Vietnam, the Soviet Union in Afghanistan, the Americans again didn't prevail in Iraq. So what's happening to Russia is not unique. A great power is basically coming worse off against a much smaller but highly motivated and well-equipped country. And it seems to me it's very difficult to predict what will happen, the so-called fog of war, the ebbs and flows of war, but the momentum is definitely with the Ukrainians at the moment. And you can foresee a situation where the Russian army could collapse. that is not entirely impossible. And as I say, the stakes are very high for Mr. Putin, of course, and that's why one of the reasons he's rattled the nuclear saber, threatened to use nuclear weapons if the situation gets worse.
Can we talk about whether a diplomatic solution could potentially be reached then, based on what you've just said, or have we gone past that point now?
No, I think we've gone past it. And Mr. Zelensky, President Zelensky, I should say, explicitly has ruled out any diplomatic solution with the Putin regime. And I think also there was some pressure in the West early on in the conflict for some sort of land for peace deal. I think that's now gone, simply because of the behavior of the Russian army in Ukraine, the war crimes it apparently has committed. And also the Ukrainians believe that victory is on their side. They believe that victory is within their grasp. And it'll be very difficult. Any sort of diplomatic deal could be seen as rewarding the aggression of Russia. And I think much of the international community is loath to hand Putin a victory at a time when Ukraine is on the military offensive. Quite frankly, Mr. Putin has ripped up the UN Charter, and therefore he can solve this problem in 24 hours. He can simply withdraw Russian troops to the internationally recognized boundaries of Russia and remove them from another country, which is Ukraine.
Yeah, well, that certainly doesn't seem to be part of who he is, though, right?
Right.
Talking about international reaction, what I find quite interesting at the moment is that China has gone quite quiet. And we know at the beginning of this invasion, can I call their relationship cosy between Russia and China? So what do you make of that relationship now?
Measured coziness.
Yeah.
We were told back in February it was a relationship about limits, but clearly there are limits. Yeah. The Chinese have told the Russians in no uncertain terms that under no circumstances could there be any justification for the use of nuclear weapons, tactical or otherwise. Both India and China have met with Mr. Putin in recent weeks at the Shanghai Cooperation Council, and both of them, in their different ways, told Mr. Putin they were not happy about the situation in Ukraine. And so far, India and China have been quite loyal to Mr. Putin, which raises questions about their judgment, given the way things are going in the Ukraine for the Russian army. But I think there is a sense that internationally, Mr. Putin his allies are not exactly behind him, because they realize it could have fallout for them. And domestically, we're seeing criticism now within the Russian state media. They're becoming more open about the sheer scale of the losses and the retreats, and they're demanding, at least the official state media is demanding, a reversal of Russians' declining position. That's not going to be easy to achieve. And by implication, is a criticism of their leaders' stance towards the Ukraine.
I guess the scary thing for everyone is, if Putin is backed into a corner, is how he will respond. Professor Robert Patman, as always, we so appreciate your time and your insight. Thank you for being with us this morning.
Thanks very much, Jenny May.